Good evening, curious minds of the interwebs. I'm Alexa, resident ooky spooky girly, and today we're diving into something science can't even begin to explain. Time slips. Try as you might, I haven't heard any scientific theories yet that make sense to me. So I hope you're ready, because welcome to the top 5 time slips that defy all logic. Number 5. Time to travel back to Versailles. The year was 1901 and a pair of friends, 55-year-old Anne Moberly and 38-year-old Eleanor Jourdain to be precise, were on holiday in France. They were both teachers at St. Hugh's College in Oxford and had set out to see the vast palace of Versailles, the center of political power in France until the French Revolution in 1789. They turned to visit Le Petit Trianon, a small chateau on the grounds given to Marie Antoinette, as a private retreat for her personal use. Now, the ladies got a little bit lost searching for the chateau, and it was only during this interlude that they made history, even if only in some small way. They encountered several people in 1789 period attire, carrying out period activities, and passed a handful of structures that had not existed since that year. Their unexpected visit to 112 years in the past culminated with an encounter with Marie Antoinette herself, sketching on the grounds of her chateau. Mrs. Jourdain wrote later that everything suddenly looked unnatural and unpleasant. Even the trees seemed to become flat and lifeless, like woodworked in tapestry. There were no effects of light and shade, and no wind stirred the trees. They reached the end of a wood, close to the Temple de l'Amour, and came across a man seated beside a garden kiosk, wearing a cloak and large shady hat. According to Moberly, his appearance was most repulsive, and Jourdain noticed that the man slowly turned his face, which was marked by smallpox, and observed that his complexion was very dark. The expression was evil and yet unseeing, and though she didn't feel that he was looking particularly at them, she felt a repugnance to going past him. A man later described as tall with large dark eyes and crisp curling black hair under a large sombrero hat came up to them and showed them the correct way to Le Petit Trianon. After crossing a bridge, they reached the gardens in front of the palace, and Moberly noticed a lady sketching on the grass who looked at them. She later described what she saw in great detail. The lady was wearing a light summer dress, and on her head was a shady white hat, and she had lots of fair hair. Moberly thought she was a tourist at first, but the dress appeared to be old-fashioned, and that's when it dawned on her that this was Marie Antoinette herself. After this, they were directed around to the entrance and joined a party of other visitors. The strange feelings and visions of the past had vanished. Now, it was many months before the woman told of their strange encounters. Visiting Versailles sometime later, they weren't able to find the landmarks that they had noticed during the incident. And during their research, they thought they recognized the man by the kiosks as the Comte de Vaudreuil, a friend of Marie Antoinette, who herself had been thought to have been seen by Moberly. Within months, they published their account in a book called An Adventure, later published as The Ghosts of Trianon. And as they were both respected academics who did not desire bizarre publicity, they published it under pseudonyms. See, this is what solidified the validity of this tale for me, at least. The woman just wanted the truth out there without the fame. Their experience became known as the Versailles time slip, the Ghosts of Trianon, or the Moberly-Jourdain incident, and it has intrigued researchers, historians, and enthusiasts of the paranormal ever since. No one has been able to explain what the woman saw. Both women are reported to have had many paranormal experiences before and after their adventure, though. And one of them, Moberly claimed to have seen in the Louvre in 1914 an apparition of the Roman Emperor Constantine, a man of unusual height wearing a gold crown and a toga, but he wasn't seen by anybody else. During the First World War, Jourdain, the dominant personality of the pair, and who had become principal of St. Hugh's, became convinced that a German spy was hiding in the college. I believe both of these women had abilities that most of us don't tap into, and they just wanted answers. Simple as that. Number 4. Careful around a pool. Martin Crema experienced a time slip in the indoor pool room of the Biltmore House in Asheville, North Carolina that still bothers him to this day. For reference, the Biltmore Estate is a historic house museum and a tourist attraction. The main residence is a chateau-esque style mansion built for George Washington Vanderbilt II between 1889 and 1895 and is the largest privately owned house in the United States at 178,000 square feet of floor space. Still owned by George Vanderbilt's descendants, it remains one of the most prominent examples of Gilded Age mansions. And since that fateful day, Martin has read other people's reports of a similar occurrence, but he really doesn't think it had anything to do with ghosts or haunting or anything similar. Well, at this point, I think I can safely consider myself an expert on what differs, a demonic encounter, ghostly experience, and both from a time slip. So let's dive into the case and then debate afterwards. So Martin was around the age of 17 when he visited the house for the first time, and remembers a feeling of uneasiness as he was approaching the pool room. And since there were a lot of people around and he was with his grandparents, he just pretended that he was okay, and being underground, chalked it up to a case of, random claustrophobia. It happens. But when he stepped into the pool room, everything changed. Instead of what should have been a drained, empty pool room perfectly on display, he was met with the view of a pool full of water, with people wearing retro bathing suits and swimming all around. You practically feel the water, smell it, hear it. Everybody else from the present time was completely gone. Now Martin's memory is a little fuzzy, but he remembers falling backwards, to the point where his grandfather had to catch him from hitting the floor, and when he opened his eyes again, he was back, but feeling absolutely horrible, as if he had actually fainted. He told his grandpa that he needed to get out of that room, and he had to hold his eyes shut as he was being guided to the other side. The memory of feeling sick and a very clear sense of the imagery of the pool full of water, with people swimming in it, has stayed with Martin over the years. Alright, time for me to stop narrating and break this down. For me, it's a very clear example of a time slip. I can't even wonder why anyone would call it a ghost situation. The complete switch in scenery, the multiple apparitions, and the sensory attack are all more than something, a simple ghost could do. Now, the time slip could be from a ghostly version of the past, but it's still very much a lapse in time. I do understand the estate itself is haunted by multiple ghosts, so I guess I kind of understand how people could get things confused, but it seems like it's just an overall hotbed location for the spiritual. Kinda like how in, the town of Sunnydale and Buffy was a hellmouth that attracted all sorts of demons, this estate is just a home for ghosties and links to the past. Number 3, time to visit Leeds Castle. This is the tale of Alice Pollock, who was born into the, minor aristocracy, and this allowed her entry to Leeds Castle in a time when it was not generally open to the public. For reference, Leeds Castle is a famous and picturesque castle not far from London, England. Alice was psychic, and she was trying out some psychometry in Henry VIII's old room. Oh, psychometry is the technique where a psychic will touch an object and learn about its history from the impressions they pick up. Touching various objects in Leeds Castle propelled Alice back into the past. The castle changed and became cold and bare, like the carpet that was there vanished, and there was a blazing fire piled with logs. Alice saw a tall woman pacing back and forth in the room, apparently lost in concentration, but then in an instant, all returned to normal. Later, research informed Alice that the room in which she had the vision in had been the prison room of Joan of Navarre. Now, Joan was Henry V's stepmother, who was imprisoned after being accused of plotting against the king. She was found innocent and thankfully was eventually released, but it explains why she'd be, pacing in concentration. Number 2, a tale from a pilot. Now, if I've said it once, I've said it a million times, but I place a lot of belief and trust in experiences that come from pilots, since, they're legitimately trained to recognize the unknown in the air and remember everything about what they see. My ADHD brain could never remember that much, unless it's a hyperfixation. And even then, I wouldn't trust it to remember anything on command when I'm overwhelmed. So back in 1935, when he was just a wing commander, Sir Victor Goddard was instructed to inspect an inactive airbase located in Drum, near Edinburgh, in Scotland. Flying over it, Sir Goddard found the airbase to be in a poor state, with cattle grazing on the wild grass that had now forced its way through the tarmac. Like, the entire place was in complete shambles. But later on, while flying its plane, he got into a bit of trouble thanks to the harsh weather conditions, and to avoid an accident, decided to fly back to the abandoned airbase till the weather cleared out, just a little bit, for safety. As he approached the airbase though, the torrential rain oddly and very abruptly gave way to bright sunshine, and when Sir Victor noticed that the airbase was not only in mint condition, but all of a sudden it's in use, he spotted mechanics wearing blue overalls working on the yellow planes parked on the runway, but was unable to recognize a single aircraft on the base. So there was no way the place could have gone from decrepit to fully renovated and operational in half an afternoon. And more importantly, these guys weren't wearing the khaki colored uniforms that were a norm at the time. Also, the Air Force painted all their planes in silver, not yellow. Completely baffled by what in tarnation was going on, Sir Goddard got the shock of his life 4 years later though. So Europe was war-torn, and he happened to visit Drem again. But this time he saw everything he saw 4 years back in 1935. The same people in blue overalls servicing yellow planes, and he even found the plane he couldn't recognize before, now identifying it as a Miles Magister. I've had a glimpse into the future before myself, but never anything that detailed. Thankfully, he didn't go mad from it. Just, a little silly little time slip. Number 1, Home Sweet Home. Back in the summer of 1987, Nick Brittle was visiting his girlfriend Helen, who lived in a big former vicarage built around the 1800s in a small village in Yorkshire. One August weekend, Helen had the house to herself and decided to have a small party. Now, Nick was instructed to bring his buddy Tim along to the party to be set up with one of Helen's friends. So the party was him and Tim and Helen and 3 of her friends from university. Got it? Awesome. The party was full of debauchery, partially helped by, liquid courage, and by midnight the girls were all in Helen's bedroom, while the 2 guys were ready to find somewhere to fall into a deep sleep. To set the scene, imagine a house with around 12 bedrooms on a single floor. And while Nick knew the door to the bathroom and to Helen's room, a lot of the other doors were kind of a mystery, especially in that state. Tim and Nick walked to the end of a passage and pushed open a door, revealing a room entirely empty except for 2 small ancient iron beds squeezed against the wall and a few packing crates. There was no carpet on the floor, no other furniture. It was like a small storage room, but there were beds and the guys weren't too fussy, so they fell asleep pretty quickly. The next thing Nick knew was that he was sitting up in bed, looking out of the window, and it suddenly had 5 bars, upright bars, like an old jail. The sun was was streaming into the room and it was blinding. But outside the window, he could clearly see the branches of a large tree as they moved in what seemed to be a very windy morning. Once his eyes adjusted, he realized that the room was filled with very old-fashioned furniture, and there was no ceiling electric light. As he tried to make sense of where he was, he could hear people moving outside the room, and more specifically the sound of china cups and plates clinking, as people apparently carried and served food. He tried to get out of bed, but was paralyzed from the waist down. A door opened and a young woman walked into the room, and she was dressed like a servant from a period movie, and talked in a way he couldn't really understand before leaving. At this point, Nick was shaking like a leaf and trying to figure out what to do next. He looked down at his watch and everything went dark. When he woke again, he could hear snoring, and his digital watch showed it was 3:10 in the morning. Wherever he had been, he was back where he needed to be. He leapt out of bed, felt for the light switch, and turned it on, and thankfully everything was 1987 again. Confirmed by the language from Tim, who was woken up by the light. Yeah, I can't say anything, he said. First thing in the morning though, Nick was awoken once again by the sunlight streaming through the window, but this time there was no bars in the window, no random tree limbs bending the shafts of light that streamed into the room. It was just an ordinary window. He went downstairs and told Helen the entire story over a cup of coffee. She went quiet and asked if he had entered her father's study, which Nick very much had not. She led him to the study and pointed out a set of 5 old sepia photographs which were framed on the wall. The earliest dated from about 1880 and showed the growing up of a family in full Victorian attire. There were 8 offspring and one was in an ancient wheelchair. They were all arranged in front of a huge oak tree, behind which the window of the time slip room clearly had bars. Creepy. And that brings us to the end of our time, and my goodness is my brain ever spinning. I don't think I've ever experienced a time slip yet personally, but hey, never say never. If you enjoyed my ramblings today, could you help us out by giving this video a like, subscribing if you weren't already, hit the bell for more curiosities from us here at Top 5 Scary Videos, and I'll see y'all next time, you lovely spooky people.